It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a Republican political strategist who you can follow on X at The Thomas Guide. John Thomas, welcome.
Hey, John, good to be with you and see you.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by.
No problem.
So let's start out by talking about the politics of scandal, because Eric Swalwell, for a moment in time, was arguably one of the biggest celebrities in the resistance movement. He was one of the Democrats who handled the impeachment of Donald Trump. He was a guy who lived on cable news and lusted for confrontation. I think he was one of the Democrats who would go on with Tucker Carlson on his program on the Fox News channel, and they'd get into a cat fight on live television. Then he became a candidate for governor here in California. I believe that is the reason that Eleni Kounalakis dropped out of the race. She thought she couldn't beat him. The polls indicated that he would likely be the top-performing Democrat in the primary election. And then, John, when it rains, it pours. The allegations started coming out about sexual assault. He was forced to drop out of the race. He is now lawyered up. He has a criminal defense attorney. And most recently, his home in Washington, D.C. was raided by the FBI, and he himself was confronted by the FBI at SFO Airport, and his phone and his laptop were all taken by the federal government. And it looks like they're investigating whether or not he is going to be charged with sexual assault. Everything just fell apart for him all at once. But these open secrets that existed didn't impact his career up until the first woman came forward. What do you make of what has happened to him, how long he was able to keep these secrets hidden, and how quickly his world just fell apart?
Well, you hit it on the head. It wasn't a well-kept secret in DC. Most folks did know. In fact, Fox News and Tucker Carlson made fun of routinely the fact that Eric Swalwell was honeypotted by a Chinese spy. These were pretty much out in the open. I think the issue, John, is Eric never really had real power as just another member of Congress. And the fact that he was about to approach real power in a race in which he was the front runner for that race, the information came out, and it was incredible to me. Not so much that it was covered, because this is kind of, it's why, when you run for high profile races, particularly like president of the United States, they call it the MRI for the soul, because things that perhaps people didn't care about before, all of a sudden people begin to care about. What was stunning to me, John, is how quickly it happened. And the fact that his Democratic colleagues let him hold the front runner status for so long. So the question I'm still interested to know, John, is it that this issue was forced by an opponent in the 11th hour? Because honestly, a Katie Porter or somebody should have taken Swalwell out earlier on in the race, allowing other shuffling to happen. The late shuffle really was perfectly timed for Becerra as the only one to kind of take control of the race. So it's interesting to see that at the end of the day, when Democrats knew that he had all this baggage, they didn't care until it actually affected them, when Eric might actually have power.
If he were to go to a consultant and say, okay, I want to run for governor, I want to hire you to run my race, I would assume that most strategists, most consultants would then hire a firm to see what's out there on this candidate so they know what's coming. I would also assume that his opponents in the race would hire firms to figure out what was going on in his past that may or may not be relevant in this campaign. How did this not come up in his own internal organization or in the other campaigns? Because it seems like it was the news media that brought these women out.
Yeah, it was. Well, let me tell you, first of all, you're right. I can say confidently, I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. It's called a self-vulnerability study. It even has a term, a package that we start when consultants start with a candidate, that you typically top-level consultants would mandate that as part of their engagement, even before they're getting engaged, saying, I need that full self-vulnerability package. And that's not just because we want to decide, hey, is this candidate safe to work with? Are they going to implode? But also, John, because when we do an extensive benchmark survey and we test all the messages, both against our opponents, but also for our guy, we also test the hits on ourselves to understand, are there any fatal hits? If there are really hard hits, what are the right responses? Do we get out ahead of it? Do we ignore it? You can't ignore those. It looks like his campaign consultants committed malpractice because they didn't conduct that study. Now, maybe it's because Eric didn't want that information to be held by his team. I'm not sure, but there's no excuse for a Katie Porter or others to have not conducted that same level of opposition research. That's campaign malpractice.
How reckless was it of Nancy Pelosi, who was then the Speaker of the House and Democratic leader when Swalwell served in the House of Representatives, and Adam Schiff, who was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, to leave him on that sensitive committee, knowing there was all of this compromat out against him, and knowing that he was sleeping with the Chinese spy, because that which he had denied publicly has since been verified. She acknowledged that she had an affair with him on more than one occasion, I believe. He was left on that committee and exposed to some of the nation's biggest secrets. And they were asked to remove him from that committee, and they all stood by him, and they all defended him, and they said that these attacks on him were part of a partisan witch hunt. We now know that's not true.
Well, that actually was the thing that was most shocking to me when it was going down, was that the Democrats are so in such a partisan, like tribal cocoon, that they can't do the obvious right thing because it would be perceived perhaps as agreeing with the President Trump or agreeing with the Republicans. But I also, John, think the mainstream media are to blame. The fact is, the Democrats, like Adam Schiff, weren't under sufficient external pressure from the media to remove and take action against Swalwell.
The race to replace Swalwell has been decided, at least in the short term, and a DSA candidate who the Democratic Party did not want to win ended up winning that election. They wanted just a standard rank and file Democrat who would vote the party line. They didn't get that. They ended up with another DSA problem child. What do you make of the fact that the DSA is still not just in New York State, but Colorado, California, all over the place? They are still rolling up the wins in these Democratic primaries.
Okay, this is the story to me. You could have written it off as a one-off if Mandami won, but you weren't seeing a pattern. In politics, particularly as we're going into a big cycle like this, a midterm cycle, where I'm always trying to identify larger trends and patterns, and we can't ignore it any longer, that this is a serious tailwind and movement within the Democratic Party. It's where the intensity lives, is with Democratic socialists. This should be a serious red flag for Democrats because they're nominating these candidates that, quite frankly, in a wobbler of a swing district, are not electable to defeat a Republican candidate. Now, maybe there's a one-off exception where they do win, but it creates viability challenges for the Democrats. But then, of course, if these Democrat socialists start winning, then, of course, good luck to a Hakeem Jeffries to govern with these socialists, because it used to be just wing nuts like AOC and others that didn't have much power. But you could have a critical mass of these. And then let's fast forward to the presidential cycle. It's possible that the Democrats, instead of nominating kind of a milquetoast Midwestern Democrat, it's very possible that the intensity continues to nominate an AOC type candidate, which both is scary for the country, but also a gift for the Republicans, because arguably you could defeat an extreme leftist.
What does the party do? Because you look at this map, the calendar is now out. We know that South Carolina is going first. We know that Nevada, New Mexico, Virginia, Michigan, they'll also be voting early on in the Democratic primary. If you have a bunch of establishment candidates who are essentially all working the same corner, where you have Kamala, you have Newsom, you have J.B. Pritzker, you have I guess Gretchen
Jared
Whitmer says
Polis,
she's
yeah.
not going to run. But yeah, you have all of those just standard partisan Democrats who are in the race. And you have either an AOC or a Bernie or someone from that part of the DSA who is going to run and have that lane all to themselves. If you split that vote among the standard partisan Democrats enough ways, you can almost create a lane for the DSA candidate to grab the ball and run right into the end zone.
Yeah, it's actually obviously completely different on the issues, John, but it's actually a similar dynamic to what President Trump enjoyed in 2016 when the establishment lane was split many different ways. President Trump held on to his lane in the mid 20s and everybody said that he couldn't win. It's like actually he did because he was able to hang on to a large enough portion of his base, of the Republican Party uninterrupted. I could see the same thing going on here. And here's the other truth, John. Yes, the intensity right now is with socialism, which is crazy in the Democratic Party. But let's also look at mainstream Democrats. I mean, what have they done? What solutions are they offering to Democratic voters? Nothing really. Nothing really innovative, no new policy proposals. Whereas at least on the far left, there is although they're crazy, I believe AOC believes what she's saying. I'm not so sure that there's a conviction and intensity from other Democrats on kind of the more middle of the road lane.
Is there anyone within the Democratic Party, the chairman of the party, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, whomever, who has the power and the stature to go to these candidates and go, okay, if we split the vote too many ways, the DSA is going to win the nomination, and we cannot have that because the likelihood that we will lose the November election becomes very high. So, Pritzker, it's not your time, get out. Polis, it's not your time, get out. Newsom, it's not your time, get out. Does anyone have that power?
Not really. You look at the state of the Democratic Party, it's in complete disarray. The Democratic National Committee's leadership is feckless and broke. I think, John, that might work in the 11th hour as the field begins to narrow. But the politics of self-interest in a presidential cycle is just, why not? Why not run? Stranger things have happened if you're a Democrat to perhaps be the last. They all believe they're the last man, could be the last man standing. I think a name that I still think might be one of the top contenders, if it isn't an AOC, is John Ossoff. I'm really impressed by him. Obviously, he's Jewish, which is a problem for the anti-Semitic wing of the Democratic Party. But I think Ossoff might be able to straddle both kind of a fresher, new generational face, but kind of that centrist lane. So I wouldn't count Ossoff out, but I think they might end up just running too many standard Democrats, leaving an AOC open.
What do you make of his philosophy? He's running for re-election in the state of Georgia, which is a state that voted for Donald Trump last time around. It's a state that has historically voted Republican. They have a Republican governor. They have Republican statewide elected officials. He's almost bypassing his re-election. He's not running as a red state Democrat. He's almost running as a national candidate. Mm-hmm. And he's not running to the right of the Democratic Party. He's running as a hard partisan who is out to get Donald Trump at every opportunity. Is he looking beyond his reelection too soon with that strategy? Or do you think that he believes correctly that he has this in the bag?
Well, I know his team fairly well, so I can speak with pretty good certainty about this. There's a couple things motivating his national profile. One is he's trying to raise small dollars. So the best way to raise small dollars right now is to run against Donald Trump. So you can send email and text solicitations to, the unmarried white woman in Orange County, California, that maybe voted for Katie Porter and is angry. So it's a lot about small dollars, but it's also, John, it is a little bit of arrogance because I think in part the Ossoff team sees such an incredibly weak field going into the next presidential cycle that they want to begin to position themselves. But I've cautioned Ossoff's team as I would caution Newsom's team. You run the risk here of just peaking too soon. At least Newsom doesn't have a re-election to contend with, but Ossoff has to pay close attention. Anything can happen in Georgia, and if he nationalizes this too quickly, it could backfire.
Let's come back to California for a moment, because Javier Becerra is running really a shell of a campaign. After he won the primary, he disappeared, and we haven't seen much of him. Steve Hilton has challenged him to a series of debates. Becerra says at some point in the future we will debate, but he really won't give details beyond that. He's not sitting down for many interviews. He's not having many press availabilities. What do you make of this strategy? We know that he doesn't think he has to campaign that hard, as a Schiff did not. But it's becoming an issue. It's becoming something that's talked about in ways that it hasn't been in previous campaigns. Do you think that this is going to give Hilton an opening to go after Becerra on?
It's an interesting dynamic. First, Becerra is taking his lead and hoping that it just becomes a race of R's versus D's, and the math is, you can't get around the math. And conventional wisdom would say that's right. The other thing is, I think Becerra knows that he's not an incredibly strong candidate head to head with other candidates like a polished Steve Hilton. So for him, he has to make no mistakes. That's kind of rule number one. So he's laying low. Now the question is he laying too low? I'm not sure. I think Steve has to disrupt this race somehow, and the best way he can do it is by engaging with Javier. And if Javier doesn't engage with him, it limits Steve's opportunities to shuffle this race up. My hunch is Javier is basically saying, look, I'm going to raise just enough money from, I'm kind of call it the I'm sorry establishment money that didn't come to me. I'm going to let my TV ads roll in the home stretch, and that should be sufficient. And that should work. But if something were to break out that's bad in the state, for instance, it could look at what are those moments, John, where the Becerra was nowhere to be found in a moment where Californians were expecting his leadership. So I think it probably works. But look, if we zoomed out, he's not a good candidate. If you ran in any other competitive state, he would be losing. He'd be 10 points behind. He's lucky that registration just so heavily favors Democrats right now.
John Thomas, Republican political strategist. You can follow him on X at @TheThomasGuide. John, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.